Night horror. On the night of September 6th to 7th, 2010, something incredible happened. What it was and what it was connected with remained a mystery to me. That evening, only my mother and I were at home. My brother spent the night with his girlfriend. Mom was still sitting in the kitchen, and I went to bed at about 23:30. I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I woke up at 2 o'clock because the city phone was ringing. It's loud. He called for a long time and persistently, despite the late time. Strangely enough, I had no desire to pick up the phone, although everything is usually on reflexes when I'm asleep. Moreover, I became afraid of the insistence of the caller. I got up, dropped the call and went back to bed with a clear conscience. 5 minutes passed, and the call was repeated, and I felt uneasy. This time, Mom came to the phone and, oddly enough, also dropped the call, although this had not been noticed before. I tried to fall asleep again, but after a few minutes, already half asleep, I hear someone hit the kitchen window twice, with an interval of a second, very hard, but not as if it was done with a fist or a stick. I tried it myself later. The sound is completely different, but as if someone hit the glass with his whole body. I asked my mom, half asleep, if she had heard the same thing as me. She confirmed what she heard. Then I thought they were drunks. We live on the first floor, in a standard brick 5-story building, and without any second thought I went to the kitchen to investigate. But there was no one on the street, and our 2 cats were very scared of something. After checking the kitchen and going out on the balcony, I found nothing and went to bed. My mother and I were scared. We began to say prayers and tried to fall asleep again. We lie down and watch the cats rushing from corner to corner. It became creepy. Mom got up to the icons and began to read prayers. Then the phone rang for the 3rd time. I dropped the call and started to baptize the phone. I was shivering with fear. I could barely squeeze out the words "Our Father." The time on the clock was about 2:30. And then there are 2 more powerful blows on the kitchen window, even stronger and more insistent than before. I was already shaking with fear. Prayers were being read with difficulty. The cat seemed to have gone mad. After a while, I still decided to go out on the balcony. Naturally, there was no one on the street. What it was and why it came, I do not know. My mother and I were able to fall asleep only after a few hours. But I have never experienced such horror in my life. Then the neighbors told me, they say our house was built on the site of a very old burial ground, and supposedly once every 10 years those whose peace was disturbed come out at night and scare people. A bowl of bread. It happened to me 2 years ago. I then decided to cut off from the army. At the military enlistment office, I pretended to be a suicidal fool, and I was sent to a psychiatric hospital for examination. In fact, there was nothing special about it. The hospital was like a hospital, except that there was absolutely nothing to do there, and I had to read all day long. The toilet there was terrible. Imagine a room to by 3 meters. Instead of toilets there are just holes in the floor. It's always full of people and the door never closes, so that the nurses can observe everything that happens inside. When I went to the toilet for the first time to brush my teeth, I noticed a strange thing. On the windowsill, there was a half-liter bottle with water and soaked crusts of bread. The nurse, an elderly woman in her 60s, said that almost all patients bring bread to the toilet after dinner and leave it there, in this homemade bowl. They don't pay attention to it. Let them wear it to themselves, as long as they don't get rowdy. On the 3rd day, I decided to go to the toilet after lights out, since it was allowed. Closing the door and squatting in the corner, I decided to smoke. The window was wide open. It was October outside, and it was still quite warm. I didn't turn on the light. The moon was very bright that day. and everything was clearly visible. I had just taken out the matches when I heard a nose outside the window. The second floor. After all, you never know who goes there. I thought and did not attach any importance to this. After a few seconds, the nose was repeated. It was like tapping fingers on wood, only much more sonorous. Then I was seriously scared. I decided to get up, but suddenly I saw that the moon was no longer reflected in the tile on the floor. Therefore, something was blocking it. I looked at the window and held my breath. There was a cross between a man and a spider hanging on the bars. I could only see the contours of the head. It was slightly smaller than usual and sharpened towards the end. But I saw everything else very clearly. The hands of this creature were very thin, and I was surprised how it could hang there at all. It looked around with a cursory glance and, not noticing me, stretched out its hand and reached into that very bowl of bread. I sat there and was afraid to move. I didn't even take a breath. Suddenly it started talking. It was a human voice, but deep, very low. It spoke as if on an inspiration, interrupting every word in the middle and inflating its voice at the end, as if it was hiccuping. These were some separate words. Yes, here. Well, ma'am. Needless to say, by that time I was half dead. Meanwhile, it continued to eat this soggy bread. It fell out of its mouth, and it kept talking to itself. Then footsteps were heard in the corridor, and this creature with all its might tore up the grate, overturning the bowl. A nurse came into the toilet. God, how glad I was to see her then. She turned on the light and asked why I was sitting here for so long. She told me to get up and took me to my room. That night I couldn't close my eyes. I stared out the window all night. It seemed to me that this creature was watching me. I only slept during the day. They let me go home on the weekend and told me to come on Monday, but of course, didn't come. Night watchman. I have been studying for the last year at a university in the city of N, and I live in the city of M. It was November. A session was coming up, and I skipped a lot before that, and one of the teachers clearly hinted that I would not give him without a bribe. I made friends, and one of them offered me a job at home. It was necessary on the night from Saturday to Sunday and from Sunday to Monday to watch the warehouse territory by cameras, and the cameras were hooked up to the computer, not to the TV, as it usually happens. And the image was transmitted from the computer over the internet to me. They paid quite a bit by the standards of this city, but it didn't take any effort. And with my experience of playing online RPGs, I'm no stranger to sitting up at night without sleep. For 2 weeks everything was fine. And so, on the night of the penultimate Sunday in November to Monday, I sat down at the computer. The picture, I must say, was not updated constantly, but with an interval of 5 to 7 seconds, so I was still sitting in ICQ at the same time, and reading all sorts of sites, sometimes glancing at the cameras. There are 4 of them, but with a resolution of 640 by 480. All fit in one window on the monitor. Occasionally cars passed by the gate on the way, and a man with a dog passed by. I went to the kitchen to pour coffee, came back, wrote something to a friend, and opened the window with a picture from the cameras. On the opposite side of the road, a man was standing behind a snowdrift by a concrete fence. I watched him for another half-minute. During this time 5 or 6 pictures were updated, and the man was still standing. Well, I thought, some drunk bum, probably. I switched to ICQ, but my friend had already gone to bed. I read a few stories with Membrana. RUN switched back. The guy was standing right under the camera and looking at her. I was surprised, put my cell phone closer in case of an emergency. I was told to call the PSC or the police. The man was still standing and watching. I didn't notice right away, but he didn't move at all, stood like a statue. In the picture that changes every 5 to 7 seconds, all the movements are very noticeable, but he just didn't move and stared at the camera. The camera was black and white, but even so I noticed that he had an unnaturally pale face and sharply contrasting black eye sockets. Then a bottle broke on the stairs, and I almost peed myself. I jumped up in my chair, listened. The alcoholic neighbors from above arranged another showdown. I looked at the monitor. There was no image from any camera. I sensed something was wrong and immediately called the police. They were in no hurry to pick up the phone. I got through only the third time. The next day, I learned from the local news and then from a friend who arranged for me there that the warehouse had burned down and 3 policemen burned down in it. When firefighters arrived, they found an open gate and an empty police UAZ, and the warehouse was blazing like a match. Of course, I was fired from my job, but the money was still paid, just enough for a bribe. So, it was all 4 years ago. Now I live and work in my hometown. And yesterday, when I arrived at a cafe for lunch and parked my car, I saw that he was standing behind the tram rails at the pedestrian crossing, the one with the paper pale face. Then a tram passed by, and there was no one there. Only a woman with a double stroller was crossing the road, but I'm sure it was him I saw. What should I do now? I didn't sleep well and didn't go to work today. I'm scared.